In lesson 10.6, we're going to factor quadratics when we do not have a leading coefficient of 1. In a previous lesson, we looked at something like x squared minus 10x plus 25, and we said we needed to find factors that multiplied to a positive 25, yet added to our linear term negative 10x. Our first term has to be x. That's the only way to get back to x squared. 25 could be 5 and 5 or negative 5 and negative 5. And of course, if I foiled that, I would find out that it would go back and get me my negative 10x. Now, when our leading coefficient is not 1, like in this case, you could use guess and check. That's how I was taught. But when our values are larger, because 2 and 5 are kind of small numbers, guess and check is not the easiest. So we're going to look at a more formulaic method, and it's called the 4-step factoring method. And I will show you something that's a little bit more difficult, that guess and check would not work so great. We have 6, and these aren't even huge numbers, but 6, our factors are 1 and 6. 2 and 3, factors of 15, 1 and 15, 3 and 5. And yet you could try all these combinations until you finally get the right answer. And of course you might get the right answer a little bit sooner, but it could be a process. So I would like you to, I'm going to put up the 4 steps, pause the video, and jot these down. It'll make a lot more sense when we actually work through one. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is multiply our 8 and our negative 15 because the sign goes with it, and we end up getting negative 120. Then you can either use a factor tree or maybe guessing or listing all the factors of negative 120 and combining them. Okay, so you'll notice that when I multiply 8 times negative 15, I got negative 120. I listed all the factors on the bottom, which you can do or not, it depends. And then we want to pick 2 that would add to negative 14. And it turns out to be negative 20 and a positive 6. Then we bring down the 8, x squared, the negative 15, and then we put our negative 20 and positive 6 in between. So when we look at positive 6 and negative 20, it's like saying Edward versus Ed. It's just a longer name for negative 14. Now we're going to use factor by grouping. And it's important that we have this plus sign in between. Then we take out common factors out of each set of parentheses. Then our leftovers become one parenthesis and our lookalikes become the other. Notice we no longer have a plus sign in between the parentheses. If I foiled this answer, if I foiled that answer, I would get the 8x squared minus 14x minus 15. This one is a little bit more complicated. First, we must move over the negative 2x and the positive 13, get all our terms on one side. And remember I told you we should always ask, is there anything I can factor out, and do I have perfect squares at the front and at the back? And in this case, I don't have perfect squares as my leading coefficient and my constant, but I can factor out a 3. So once I factor out my 3, now I'm going to find values that multiply to negative 18 and add to 3. Notice I had to bring down my 3. I have my plus sign in between. So even though my factors are 6 and negative 3, that would give me that negative 18, remember, they would add to that positive 3, but I still need that plus sign in between. Now we take out our common factors. Our lookalikes become one parenthesis, and our leftovers became the other. The lookalikes and my leftovers. Okay, because it's set to 0, the directions probably said we're going to solve it, so now we're going to solve. Okay, so I used my 0 product property, and I set each parenthesis equal to 0 and found out that x equals 3/2 and x equals negative 3. And remember, when we're solving quadratic equations, that the x values indicate our x-intercept, so negative 3 and 1/2. So that's where our parabola would intersect our x-axis. On this last slide, I'd like you to pause the video, try these 3 problems, and then I'll pop up the answers. Okay, so hopefully you were successful in working through these 3 problems. I have the answers here. Notice that we have to have our plus sign in between our parentheses. All the answers are underlined in green, especially for number 3. Notice we had to multiply the 8 and the negative 21. So on the right, that comes out to negative 168. And easy factors were 8 and 21. And that didn't work, so I factored 8 to 2 and 4 and 21 to 7 and 3, and then I mixed and matched to find my factors of 12 and 14. And then because it was set equal to 0, we had to solve and use our 0 product property, so x equals 7/4 and x equals negative 3/2. Also, final note, when we're taking out a common factor out of the parentheses, we always must take out something. And in number 2, I ended up taking out a negative 1, but sometimes you might actually just have to take out a 1, and it might just be a plus 1, but you must take something out of the parentheses.